Thanks, Mark. I will start with the premise that people are ready for change. People don't dislike change per se. What they might dislike is to be changed. They want to have an option to choose from. Let us look at the two dimensions that this roundtable focuses on: technological change and behavioral change. I will focus on three observations and elaborate on greenhouse gas emissions. First, looking at the past, where did we succeed in reducing greenhouse gas emissions? One of the examples we succeeded in is the sector of home heating. We succeeded in many European countries. This is the province, one Austrian province of Salzburg, where you see that that's the right-hand side. Left-hand side is all over Austria. You see the heating degree days rather stable over the last 2 decades, and the greenhouse gas emissions from this sector declining. And on the right-hand side, this is now the province of Salzburg, where we have a strong increase over just 1 decade in the share of new homes equipped with solar energy and biomass, from 10% at the mid-90s up to 70% a decade later. When we look across the board, and this is now European Union data, we see that over the 20-year period, almost 20-year period, 1990 to 2008, we have lots of sectors where you do have declines, but there is one sector, transport, and on the right hand, the second but last, international transportation, where we have a dramatic increase. So we did not succeed in transport, we did succeed in most countries in housing. Why? One of the reasons is that technological progress in housing construction, new houses, and housing insulation was so fast that it outbalanced the growth in more dwelling area per person. We did not find the same in transport. Basically here, efficiency increases in cars were outbalanced by the mileage increase. First conclusion, technological change that we have focused on in the past mainly, I would say, alone has not done the job and will not do the job in the future. Second observation, from the perspective of an economist. What's the cheaper option? What's the cost of this change? Here I would like to report on one exercise. This was an exercise by the OECD on environmentally sustainable transport in the early 2000s. The objective was to really substantially reduce emissions, minus 80% of CO2 within 30 years, minus 90% of volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides. So 30 years of time give enough feasibility for such a reduction in both, in leaving enough time for market penetration of new technologies and behavioral change. Deliberately, we set 3 scenarios. One, which did the whole job just by focusing on technology. A second, just focusing on behavioral change. And third, a combination of the 3. You can show that each of the 3 scenarios can do the job, but in terms of costs, it's clearly evident that only the combination of the 3, the combination of the 2 approaches, so the third scenario, will be the cheapest one. Third observation, our current greenhouse gas emission accounting seems to report emission reductions in a way that do not carry over to global emission reductions. What does that mean? Over the last decade, the carbon balance in foreign trade of many industrialized countries, and especially the European Union, has worsened. That means that we are importing more and more goods that are carbon intensive in their production elsewhere on this planet. When we look at the UNFCCC accounting framework, emissions are allocated to the location of production of emissions, of productions and where they generate emissions. If we look at the consumption-based accounting scheme, we would take the UNFCCC numbers, subtract all those emissions that occur in our nation, but occur in the process of producing goods that are later exported, but add emissions that occur anywhere on this planet due to production of goods that are later imported to our country and consumed by us. If I do so, we find that this carbon net balance has worsened over the last decade especially, and the latest numbers we see so far for the European Union on the left-hand side, this gives the ratio of those consumption-based emissions versus production-based emissions. And you see countries like Switzerland that on a consumption-based accounting scheme have double the emissions than they have on a UNFCCC standard accounting scheme based on production. Lots of nations here, basically Western Europe, that has a stronger import of carbon than export. Same is true for other industrialized countries here in orange, Singapore, Japan, United States. And of course, on a global scale, it has to be balanced. So we have Eastern European countries, but also lots of emerging and developing economies who are the exporters. What does that mean? Reducing our local emissions in the European Union is not enough. We need to change our consumption. We cannot go on to just consume the same products, but just relocate their production site to another area. Changing consumption patterns can involve either or both, behavioral change and or technological change. If we seek to be really part of a strategy and part of developing a strategy that does have an impact, and this was basically a result of yesterday also here in Hofburg, if we want to be part of a strategy that does have an impact, we need to engage in dialogues with stakeholders. One example of such a dialogue I would like to report, we did that on a provincial level. This was a climate action strategy for the province of Styria, where we discussed with stakeholders, this is now the field of transport here, for the next 20 years, how can we go about to reduce emissions. And what came out of this process is that so far stakeholders put a larger emphasis on the technology-driven badges, cleaner vehicles, alternative fuels, etc., rather than behavioral-driven, like changing spatial planning, changing the mode choice, the modal split. But that will engage more, that will need more engagement with stakeholders in dialogues to really feel and to exchange on where are the areas of change. And I would like to close that with the statement that we are persons and consumers ourselves. So one question, one helpful dialogue could be also with ourselves. Where do we find our behavioral change that we would like to do? This might help to frame our own research and our own research questions and inform us where to go. Where do we find our behavioral change? Because that's, I think, the issue where we need more than we had in the past. On technological change, there's much more experience. Thanks.